Today on Diabetes Connections Type 2, finding good diabetes information can be tough. There aren't enough endos, and even if you have a great regular doctor, a lot of information can fall through the cracks. More and more digital services and telehealth options are trying to fill the void, but of course, you want to be careful about quality and cost. I'm talking to two diabetes educators who want to change how we look at this kind of care while working inside the complicated system of insurance and reimbursement. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Hello and welcome to another episode of Diabetes Connections Type 2. I am your host, Stacey Sims. For a very long time, about 10 years now, I posted a podcast for and about people with type 1 diabetes, and I wanted to do the same for this community. I am not a healthcare provider. I'm very much a layperson, but I have been in health journalism for a very long time. I'm really glad you're here. I am excited about this episode. There's some really good information here that you can act on today, and then some other things to think about for the future. So the question is, do you see an endocrinologist for your diabetes? There's a really good chance that you don't. By some estimates, there is a ratio of 1 endo for every 5,000 people with diabetes in the U.S. Now, your GP, your general practitioner, may be amazing, but you know how busy they are. And hopefully you're learning from this podcast and other sources how much has changed about diabetes in the last couple of years. My guests this week are both certified diabetes educators and registered dietitian nutritionists, along with a bevy of other certifications. Jessica Jones and Wendy Lopez are the founders of Diabetes Digital, a company that offers virtual nutritional counseling around all types of diabetes. This caught my eye because of their knowledge of insurance. They are determined to make sure people have affordable access to services. There are a lot of coaches out there who will charge a lot and don't take insurance. Those services can be very helpful, but they're not for everybody. Jessica and Wendy have advice you can use right now, and they explain what they're hoping to accomplish right after this. Jessica, Wendy, thank you so much for spending some time with me and my listeners. Welcome to Diabetes Connections Type 2.
Thank you for having us. It's an honor, and we're so excited.
Well, I'm so glad to have you here. Let me just ask you to kind of tell me a little bit about yourselves and your background and your company. Wendy, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so I'm Wendy. I'm a registered dietitian and diabetes educator. Have been working in the field for over 10 years. Jess and I met in New York City. We were working at a farmer's market in the Bronx doing nutrition education with the Department of Health. And we just really enjoyed doing the work that we were doing with the community. And we decided that we were going to start making nutrition videos in Jessica's apartment. And we put those out on the local channel to help reach more people because we just really loved educating on nutrition and ways to add more fruits and vegetables in a way that was culturally appropriate because we were working with Black and Brown communities in the Bronx. And that was quite a while ago. So there wasn't as much access as there is now, especially in New York City. From there, we then got online because back then, like social media wasn't as big as it was now. But eventually we got online. We started putting the videos out online. After that, Jess moved back to California. So then we created a podcast. That was like 7 years ago. And yeah, our platform, back then it was called Food Heaven. Now we have the Diabetes Digital podcast and platform. But it just organically grew throughout the years. And really, it was born out of our interest and passion for nutrition education and the communities that we were working with. And so much has happened.
Yeah. Jess, why don't you tell me a little bit about Diabetes Digital and what you're doing now?
Yeah, so Diabetes Digital is a company that we started at the beginning of the year. And the reason we started this company was because we didn't have anybody to refer folks to who needed virtual nutrition counseling, who had diabetes or pre-diabetes. So we thought, wow, why don't we create a company that's what we would want to see, where people can access care from registered dietitians, and some of them are also diabetes educators, including Wendy and myself. You can access nutrition care, and we also wanted to make it really accessible and have it covered by insurance because, again, like at the time, a lot of dietitians weren't taking insurance. Like I even had a private practice a few years ago and I didn't take insurance. And
we realized, especially like during the pandemic, there was a shift and people wanted to use their benefits, like inflation, all the things. So we spent the time to get a network with all of the different insurance companies, or most of them, so that we would be able to make it more accessible. And we see clients and we help them on their journey improve their A1C. We take a weight inclusive approach, which means we focus on well-being over weight loss. Because I know a lot of times with diabetes, and especially type 2 diabetes, the doctor's prescription is just lose weight. But it's more complex than that, especially for a lot of patients. It can be hard to lose weight, or they have to restrict. And studies show that many people end up gaining the weight back plus 10% more. And so the weight cycling is also not great for our health. And so we focus on your well-being. And we're also culturally inclusive. Like half of our providers speak Spanish, and we offer services in Spanish as well. And so, we just wanted to create a place that was diabetes care, but didn't feel, I don't know, just when I think of like, we've worked a lot in different clinics at different universities or hospitals, and, you have like these crusty food models, and it's like they're telling you you to cut out all carbs and cut out all your cultural foods. Hopefully they're not, but a lot of times they are. And it just feels really depressing. And so we were like, how can we take a disease that, yes, like, most people don't want to have diabetes, but, engage with diabetes and the person in a way that feels a little bit more fresh, exciting, and refreshing.
Yeah. I mean, tell me more about the weight inclusive approach to diabetes, because most doctors will say, all right, it's great to see you. Go lose some weight and go exercise. And that is the first thing to do. And as you already mentioned, if that were that easy, we'd all be a size 2. We know diets make you gain weight in the long run. You're both nodding. Wendy, I'll give this to you first. Can you explain a little bit about success? Like, does it really work? I mean, does weight, I think some of my listeners may be hearing, weight inclusive sounds nice, but I have to lose weight in order to get my diabetes under control. Not necessarily true.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because they come to us and we're taking on this weight inclusive approach. And then most of their healthcare providers are telling them, weight is one of the top indicators when it comes to diabetes management. And that's definitely a challenge that we have to work with clients with. And then there's also just society. People are constantly getting messages about losing weight, not just for health reasons, but to be seen as more desirable and things like that. So it is one of the hardest conversations that we have to navigate with our clients. But like Jess said, we really do prioritize well-being over everything else. And so, for people who have struggled with weight loss, it's probably not new. They've probably been struggling with this for years and years. And so we get into those conversations. How has that been like for you? What has worked? What hasn't worked? When you look back, has restriction worked for you in the past? And like really just kind of exploring all of those things and helping the client come to their own answers, because it's different for everyone. And, we don't want to shame people into not wanting to lose weight. We want to, empower them and meet them wherever it is that they are. And that's why our sessions are longer. Our sessions are usually an hour, because we really want to dive into those deeper topics. Typically with nutrition, you might go in and see someone for 30 minutes, but we like to do longer sessions because in a way it is kind of like therapy. And we get into other factors that are likely to have a much bigger impact than their weight on their A1C, like sleep, stress, social relationships, and all of those things.
Jessica, I'm sure you have stuff to add.
Yes, I have so much to add. A couple of things that I feel like are important. There's a lot of misconceptions about having to lose weight in order to improve your blood sugars. And we know that significant and intentional weight loss is very hard for people to maintain long term. And doctors tend to say you have to lose this weight, like Wendy mentioned, but extreme diets and rapid weight loss methods, and we do see doctors giving people extreme diets, right? And saying, oh, like we said, cut out carbs, or you have to do keto, or all these things. Those can be harmful for people with diabetes. They can lead to nutrient deficiencies and other health issues. They can lead to your blood sugar cycling, because maybe you're thinking you have to cut out carbs. You cut out carbs in the morning, and then for lunch, and then dinner, you're binging. And so that's not helpful for your blood glucose control over a short and long period of time. And so for us, we really like to focus on what are the behaviors that you can do long term. And if those behaviors lead to weight loss and that's your goal, okay, then you ended up losing weight. But we don't like to place this moral hierarchy, that people in smaller bodies are somehow inherently better than people in larger bodies. We like to be inclusive, and we like to promote the idea that we can all pursue health at every size. And so that's kind of along the lines of, hey, it's health at every size. And the other thing to keep in mind is type 2 diabetes can develop in people at any weight, especially if there's a genetic component there. So it's really important to look at the labs from our perspective as an indicator of success. And we like to have people look at their A1C, which is their average blood glucose over 3 months, maybe also in some cases fasting blood glucose. So that's one thing. Now, in terms of where is this idea that we have to lose weight for diabetes coming from, I really want to point this out because the doctors are typically citing something called the DPP, which is the Diabetes Prevention Program. And that is a long-term kind of study program that looked at how can we reduce the risk of people developing diabetes. And they found when they were measuring weight that people who lost, I think it was like 5 to 10% of their body weight, they did reduce their chance of developing diabetes. But when they revisited that study, at 10 years, they found that most people gained that weight back. So yes, they reduced the risk of developing diabetes, but they gained the weight back. But even the people who gain the weight back reduce their likelihood of developing diabetes. So it's more likely that the lifestyle changes were what reduced the risk rather than the weight loss. And I think that's really important to point out. And the lifestyle changes in the study were they were exercising and they were eating a more balanced diet, including more vegetables.
That's really interesting. I was going to ask you, what are some of the dietary changes that you've made with folks that may not result in large amounts of weight loss, but that did help them with their diabetes? So I guess you've kind of answered that, but can I ask it anyway and just kind of see what maybe Wendy, if you want to jump in, or Jessica's fine too.
Yeah. Add more fiber. Include more non-starchy vegetables at meals, adding things like fruit, which people with type 2 diabetes are very scared of, but it's absolutely okay and recommended to incorporate fruit into your day. Of course, it's important to pay attention to how much fruit you're having. We don't recommend having 10 portions of fruit, but I would say 2 portions a day is totally fine. And it's individual, right? Because with someone who's very active, they might be eating more fruit because they're burning more energy. We also recommend pairing carbohydrates like fruit and other carbs with protein and fat for more stable blood sugars. So things like that. And then with hydration, like trying to increase water intake, seltzer water is totally fine, tea, trying to reduce sweetened beverages. It's no magic bullet. It's not very sexy.
I hate hearing that. I'm always waiting for guests to tell me the magic bullet.
I know. I wish.
Like, what is the magic solution? But I mean, yeah, it's not very sexy, but it's very practical, and it's what will help long term, because you have to think about what you're going to be able to sustain long term. A lot of these restrictive diets like keto, paleo, people have a really hard time maintaining that past a few months, even a few weeks for a lot of people. It's not very practical. So you have to think about, okay, what am I actually going to enjoy and what can I sustain in the years to come?
Let me just ask, though, to continue the non-sexy theme, as you mentioned fiber, I have always been told to gradually add more fiber. I'm a sensitive stomach person anyway, but can you address that?
You've been told correct that it's really great to gradually add, because fiber, especially for some people, you mentioned you might be more sensitive. Like there's folks, even me, like certain fibers I'm more sensitive to, might get more bloating, more gas, which is all normal, right? I mean, sometimes it can be excessive, but just having, some bloating and gas every day is definitely normal. But it is important to not go from 5 grams of fiber in, a day to 50 grams of fiber. Like you're going to feel that. It's going to feel uncomfortable. So what we might recommend is, and our approach is like slowly making these changes. So it doesn't feel that you are doing anything drastic. And it almost feels like, wow, in 3 months, 4 months, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've made all these changes. It doesn't really feel like I've been doing anything. Like that's the goal. But maybe, we might focus on breakfast. Okay, we're going to start there. What's a way that you can add more fiber? One example might be something as simple as adding a cup of raspberries or even berries, which can have up to 7 grams of fiber per serving. So that might be one simple way to increase your fiber intake at that meal. And then maybe in a couple weeks, we look at the next meal at lunch. Okay, for lunch, maybe we're going to add a side salad with your meal, or we're going to add some broccoli, or we're going to use a whole grain. And so things like that make it feel like it's not so drastic. We don't like the idea of taking things away. I think people are, they consider dietitians, or they fear that dietitians are diet police, and we're going to, just be chastising them. And that's really not what dietitians do. We just want to support you and help you figure out what you can add. And in some cases, we might reduce things here and there too, right? Like, let's say somebody's having 5 cups of coffee per day and they're adding 5 tablespoons of sugar, which can be, very normal for many people. And they may not realize that sugar might be having an impact on their blood glucose levels. So then in that case, we might say, okay, how can we gradually reduce the amount of sugar that you're adding into your coffee so that it's not having the effect that we don't want?
Yeah. You started this conversation by talking about the farmers market and cultural foods. Every culture has its own fabulous foods. And I do think that is something that people do fear will be taken away. My husband is part Italian. He makes these amazing dishes. But he's found ways to make it a little bit lighter. Can you speak to that a little bit, just in terms of how you approach people or the questions that you get? I'm sure that you deal with that a lot, where people are kind of fearful that, like, okay, I need to go to my mom's house Sunday and I'm going to need to eat stuff. Like, how do we do this?
Yeah, I can answer that, because last night I literally just added these questions to our intake process, because our dietitians do have those conversations with clients, and we do not ever want to take out people's cultural foods. And we know that there's a study to suggest that when people are eating foods from their culture, they tend to absorb more of the nutrients, which sounds crazy, but there's a literal study to show that. And so we really want to focus on culture. And 2 of the questions that we're going to start asking people is, can you share a little bit about your cultural background? How does your cultural heritage influence your eating habits and food choices? And by opening that conversation up, we'll be able to get a sense of what are the foods that they love. And, maybe they do go to grandma's house every Sunday and have their favorite cultural meals. I know that I used to go to my great grandma's house every Sunday, and she would cook a huge meal. And it was like such a fun, great experience. And if somebody told me like I couldn't eat those foods, I would run for the hills. So it's like, how can we still have those foods? And if those foods might be having an impact on our blood sugar that is very detrimental, because, it's like having 1 meal a week is really not that huge of a deal. But let's say it was a detrimental impact, then maybe we can, like Wendy said, we can pair some things. We can bring a dish that might still be cultural, but incorporate more fiber and help balance our blood glucose. So that's one thing. And then we also are going to ask people, are there any other traditional foods or meals from your culture that you regularly include in your diet, and describe the significance to you, because we want to know what are those foods. Also, we focus on nutrition from a cultural perspective, but we don't know every culture, right? Like, I'm African American. I don't know, the foods of every culture. So for the clients, I know when I see clients and I ask them these questions, like, they light up, they want to be able to talk about it. And even if you do know one food, like, I remember I was working with like an Indian client. We were talking about naan. I think the difference between like naan and chapati, and they were like, oh my gosh, you know the difference? Wow, that's crazy. And I'm like, well, I just learned from talking to people and asking these questions. Yeah. So I think it just lights people up and it helps you understand them better.
Yeah. Wendy, anything to add about that?
Yeah, I 100% agree with Jess. I think that approaching it from a place of what can I add versus what can I take out? Because even like, for example, one of my favorite foods is like Southern style mac and cheese, which I think in the nutrition space, it wouldn't be considered to be the healthiest food. I don't ever see myself eliminating that. But, what I try to do, because I do enjoy eating it, not every day, but, on occasion, somewhat regularly. So whenever I have it, I try to enjoy it with some greens, with some protein, just to help balance it out a little bit more versus like, oh, I really should feel bad every time I eat this mac and cheese, or I really shouldn't be, consuming it ever. It should only be on the holidays, because that's not really realistic. And food is also about enjoyment, about pleasure. And so we want to hold space for that too.
It's just so hard, right? I mean, we all have I hate to say this, but I think most of us, I shouldn't say all of us, most of us do have a difficult relationship with food. It's so hard. I mean, it's such a wonderful part of life. It's such a guilty part of life for many with or without diabetes, right? We're always trying to figure out, how can I balance that? But I love that you both talk about long-term because it's not easy, but it's a lot easier to get things in balance for a month than for a year or for 2 years. So let me ask it a different way. When you've worked with clients who are successful long-term, what do you see the key to that being for them? Have you worked with anybody that has really stood out in that way?
Oh, absolutely. I've worked with people for 1 year, for a couple years, and everybody's different, right? There are some people where after 3 months, they're great. They only needed a couple tweaks and they're like, this is no big deal. I can do this forever. I didn't even realize. Like sometimes it's just the education, right? Like I didn't realize that I could pair these foods together and not restrict myself and manage my blood sugars or whatever the goal is. And there's other people where they might have, as you mentioned, a more fraught relationship with food. And that does take some time. And oftentimes those people tend to like working with a dietitian more long term, just to have kind of that accountability and that support when things come up. What I've noticed from private practice is people tend to do really well, maybe at the 3-month mark-ish, but then something happens. And whether it's they're traveling, whether it's a breakup, whether it's a changing of a job, and it throws them off track. And it's funny because at the 3-month mark, I think people are like, I'm good. Everything's great. Like I don't need this. And then it's nice to be able to kind of push through that, anticipating some change happening at some point and still have that support. It is all really individual, but the people who I tend to see do the best are the ones who are not trying to overhaul everything overnight, because that is one thing that I always tell people when they're like, they're very motivated and it's super exciting. It's like, great, I get that you're motivated and I would be too, but just trust me in that the smaller changes that you make over time are going to be so much better. You're going to, like Wendy said, be able to stick with it. Also investigating like why you're making these changes and being able to see that data in real time too. Because many of our patients are using CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, to be able to track their blood sugar in real time. So we can see, like, does eating this combination for breakfast actually make a difference? And having the time to investigate, get that positive feedback and reinforcement can also make it so people can stick with these changes long term.
And also it's an ongoing effort and ongoing adjustments, because when you think about changes that you're going to be able to keep up for life, I mean, just think about all the life things that come up as you get older, as life situations change. And it's similar for movement too. Like we're not going to be able to do the same type of movement that we were always able to do in our teens or in our 20s. We have to constantly adjust as our bodies change. And with nutrition, it's similar. Our appetite changes, our preferences change. And so we don't want people to be consumed by this idea of like, always having to tweak and to make all these changes, but it's just something that naturally happens and that we don't want people to be stressed out about. We want them to feel confident when it is time to make some tweaks and adjustments as things change in life.
Yeah. Look, we could keep talking for hours and hours about all of this, and I hope you'll come back on because we have just scratched the surface of what you offer. But I should ask, are your services open to all? Can people just kind of peruse the website, sign up for virtual visits, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. So our services, we are currently in 28 states and counting. We add new states every month because we have to, for some of them, get licensed in those states. And but we're in all the, the bigger states, including New York, California, Florida, Texas. And people go to our website, diabetesdigital.co, and we have a quick intake form. It takes like 30 seconds. You'll see it all over the website, but diabetesdigital.co, that's co/patient. And you can fill that out and we'll tell you whether or not you're in network, whether or not you're in the states that we service. If you are in network and you are in the states, we'll do a complimentary insurance benefits verification just to make sure that we take your insurance, and then we'll confirm your appointment and you can get started seeing a dietitian as soon as 2 days. Our dietitians are incredible. We have a great team, and we work with people with type 1, type 2, gestational diabetes, PCOS, metabolic syndrome. So definitely check us out, diabetesdigital.co.
Excellent. And then before I let you go, you started out by talking about the farmer's market. What's your favorite thing? What's your pick when you go to the farmer's market? Where do you go to first? Anything draw you?
So I have a favorite that is very hard to find, and those are squash blossoms.
Oh, yeah.
They're available literally, I think it's like 2 or 3 weeks out of the season in New York, and they're really big in Italian cultures,
My
also in
husband loves
Mexican
them.
cultures. Yeah, and I love stuffing them and frying them, and they're just delicious.
Jessica, how about you?
So I'm in California and I feel that we have most things. I mean, we don't have everything all the time, but we have a good selection. So I'm just there for like what's on sale, what looks fresh, like to get the samples. There's also a fishmonger that I always go to every week and I get some fresh salmon. They smoke their own salmon. Oh my God, it's expensive, but it's like incredible. So that's kind of my vibe. It's just like, what's new this week?
Yeah, I love that farmers markets have really come back. They were so big when I was a kid that they didn't exist for a long time. I live right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, and on the weekends you can find so many of them around here, so it's really nice. I'll tell you though, the one thing I love, and I do like all the fresh fruits and vegetables and the great food, I love the flowers. They always have spectacular flowers.
I was going to say that too.
Right, but you can't eat those. I mean, you can eat some of them, but they're not really my cup of tea.
But it makes a difference. Like every week I go, there's like a whole flower thing and I do my arrangement. It's like such a fun ritual.
That's great. I love it. Got to make the kitchen fun.
Yeah.
Jess and Wendy, thank you so much for joining me. I will link up all of the information as you listen. If you'd like to learn more, you can find that right at the website. Really appreciate you joining me, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I'll link up more information about Diabetes Digital, and you can learn more about Wendy and Jessica and what they offer. I mentioned at the top of the show that there are more and more services like this popping up in the virtual space and online. They're not all vetted, and I think you do have to be very careful. If you have any questions, if you're looking for something like this, I would urge you, if you're on social media, join our Facebook group. It's Diabetes Connections, the group. Lots of people from my other podcast, but they are amazing people in the type 1 community, more than willing to help folks with type 2. And I would also urge you, if you can't find what you need, you're not on social media, you could always reach out to me, Stacy at diabetes-connections.com. I'm happy to see if I can send you more information that may help. All right, thank you as always to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacy Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacy Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.